The night the city's richest CEO stood alone in the rain, staring at the security guard who refused to even look at him, everything changed in a way no one could have predicted. The flashing lights of luxury cars reflected off the wet pavement, reporters whispered in corners, and high society watched from a distance. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because the man who owned half the skyline had just realized that the only person who ever saw him as human was the one society told him he could never have. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel The Emotional Stories. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive. Arman Halim had everything the world could measure. At just 35, he was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation known for his sharp decisions, calculated risks, and an unshakable presence that commanded respect wherever he went. His life was structured, controlled, and perfectly polished. Every meeting, every handshake, every public appearance was part of a carefully crafted image. People admired him, feared him, and envied him, but no one truly knew him. His days were long and filled with endless responsibilities. His nights were even lonelier. The penthouse he lived in overlooked the city, but the higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. Conversations with people felt rehearsed, smiles felt artificial, and relationships felt transactional. Everyone wanted something from him, power, money, influence, but no one stayed for him. Then there was Zoya. Zoya wasn't supposed to matter. She was just a security guard assigned to the main office building where Armand worked. She wore a simple uniform, stood quietly near the entrance, and did her job with quiet dignity. Most people barely noticed her. To them, she was invisible. But Armand noticed. It started with small things, the way she greeted every employee with the same respect, whether they were interns or executives, the way she helped an elderly visitor find his way without being asked, the way she stood firm and calm even when dealing with difficult situations. There was something about her presence, steady, grounded, real, that felt completely different from the artificial world Armand lived in. One evening, after an especially exhausting day filled with tense meetings and corporate politics, Armand walked into the building later than usual. The lobby was almost empty, the silence echoing his thoughts. Zoya stood near the entrance, her posture straight, her expression calm. For the first time, he paused, not because he had to, but because something in him needed to. He didn't say anything. He simply stood there for a moment, watching her as she checked a visitor log. She looked up briefly, nodded politely, and returned to her work. There was no curiosity in her eyes, no attempt to impress him, no hidden agenda, just quiet professionalism. And strangely, that unsettled him more than anything else. Days turned into weeks, and Armand found himself noticing her more often. He began arriving a little earlier than necessary, leaving a little later than usual, just enough to cross paths with her. He never initiated conversation at first. He simply observed. Zoya, on the other hand, treated him like she treated everyone else, respectfully, but without any special attention. She didn't linger, didn't try to please him, didn't act differently around him, and that, more than anything, drew him in. Because for the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to win his approval. The first real shift happened on a rainy evening. The sky had turned dark earlier than expected, and heavy rain poured over the city, flooding streets and slowing traffic. Employees rushed out of the building, eager to get home. Armand stayed late, as always. When he finally stepped out, he realized he had forgotten his umbrella. He stood near the entrance, watching the rain fall in thick sheets. His car hadn't arrived yet, and for once he felt stuck. That's when Zoya stepped forward. She didn't hesitate or overthink. She simply held out her umbrella towards him, her expression calm as always. It was such a small gesture, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of his life, but to Armand it felt different. Not because of the umbrella, but because it came without expectation. He accepted it silently, their fingers brushing for just a second. The moment was brief, but it left something behind, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. From that night, things began to change. Armand started speaking to her occasionally. At first, it was simple greetings, then short conversations. Slowly, those moments grew longer. He learned that she came from a modest background, that she supported her family, that she had faced challenges he could barely imagine, and yet she carried herself with strength and quiet pride. Zoya, meanwhile, remained grounded. She never crossed professional boundaries, never acted differently despite his growing attention. She respected him, but she didn't idolize him. And that balance made their connection real. But the world around them was not so forgiving. Rumors began to spread. At first, they were whispers among employees. Then they reached higher levels of the company. People began to notice the CEO spending time near the entrance, engaging in conversations with a security guard. It didn't fit the image they had built for him. Executives frowned, colleagues questioned, society judged. Because in their world, people like Armand and Zoya didn't belong together. Not in any way. The pressure started subtly. A board member casually mentioned maintaining a professional image. A colleague hinted at unnecessary distractions. Friends from high society made indirect comments about knowing one's place. Armand ignored it at first because for the first time, something in his life felt genuine. But he didn't realize how heavy the weight of society's expectations could become, or how much it would cost to hold on to something real.
The rumors didn't stay whispers for long. They grew louder, sharper, more invasive, until they became impossible to ignore. What had started as quiet speculation inside the office quickly spilled into the outside world, where reputation was everything and perception mattered more than truth. Armand began to feel the shift before anyone said anything directly. Meetings became colder, conversations became shorter. People who once laughed with him now measured their words carefully, as if he had become unpredictable overnight. The board of directors, who had always trusted his judgment, started questioning his priorities. They didn't accuse him openly, but their concerns were clear. They spoke about the company's image, investor confidence, and the importance of maintaining a certain standard. What they really meant was simple. A man like him was not supposed to be seen with someone like Zoya. It didn't matter that she was kind, strong, and genuine. It didn't matter that she had more integrity than most people in his world. In their eyes, she was just a security guard, someone from a completely different class, a different life, a different reality. And in their world, lines like that were not meant to be crossed. Armand tried to ignore it. He told himself that it didn't matter, that people would eventually stop talking. But the more he tried to focus on work, the more distracted he became. His thoughts drifted back to the quiet moments he shared with Zoya, the simple conversations, the unfiltered honesty, the calm presence she brought into his chaotic life. For the first time, success felt heavy instead of fulfilling. Zoya, on the other hand, noticed the change immediately. She wasn't part of their world, but she understood it well enough. She saw the way people looked at her now, the subtle judgment in their eyes, the way some employees avoided her as if she had done something wrong. She hadn't changed, but the way the world saw her had, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. So she did what she thought was right. She stepped back. At first, it was small things. She avoided unnecessary conversations with Armand. She kept her interactions strictly professional. She made sure there was always distance between them, both physically and emotionally. Armand noticed immediately. The warmth in her presence was gone, replaced by a careful restraint that felt unfamiliar. Their conversations became shorter, more formal. The ease they once shared disappeared, replaced by silence. It frustrated him, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because he understood why she was doing it, and he hated that the world had the power to change something so real. One evening, after days of growing distance, Armand stayed back again. The office was quiet, the city lights flickering outside as night settled in. He walked toward the entrance, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that things could go back to how they were. Zoya stood in her usual place, calm and composed. But this time, when he approached, she didn't meet his eyes. That was when it hit him. This wasn't just about rumors anymore. This was about fear, not fear for herself, but fear for him. Because she knew something he was still trying to ignore, that their worlds were not just different, they were built to stay apart. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them grew heavier. Armand found himself standing alone more often, the silence around him louder than ever. The success he had worked so hard for now felt like a barrier instead of an achievement. Meanwhile, Zoya carried her own silent struggle. Every time she saw him, every time she avoided looking at him, it felt like she was losing something she had never even allowed herself to fully have. She knew her place, knew the reality of her life, knew how the world worked. And she knew that if she let herself feel more, it would only end in pain. But the heart doesn't follow logic, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't completely erase what had already begun. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A high-profile event was being held at the company headquarters, a gathering of investors, media, and influential figures. It was one of those nights where everything had to be perfect, where appearances mattered more than anything else. Armand was at the center of it all, dressed in confidence, speaking with precision, playing the role everyone expected him to play. But inside, he felt completely disconnected. At some point during the evening, his eyes drifted toward the entrance. And there she was, standing quietly, doing her job as always. For a moment, everything else faded. The noise, the expectations, the pressure, it all disappeared. There was only one truth left, and he couldn't ignore it anymore.
The night that was meant to reinforce Armand's power and reputation became the night everything began to unravel. The grand hall was filled with influential people, their voices blending into a constant hum of ambition, status, and carefully curated charm. Every handshake carried hidden intentions, every smile masked quiet calculations. It was the world Armand had mastered, the world he had built his life around, but for the first time, it felt unbearably hollow. Because across the room, standing near the entrance under soft golden lights, was the only person who had ever made him feel real. Zoya stood exactly where she was supposed to be, maintaining her composure, her professionalism, her quiet strength. She didn't belong to the glamorous scene unfolding around her, yet somehow she was the only presence that didn't feel artificial. Armand tried to focus on the conversations around him, but his mind refused to cooperate. Every word spoken to him sounded distant, meaningless. The expectations pressing down on him felt heavier than ever, suffocating him in a life that no longer made sense. And then, in a moment that no one expected, he did something that would change everything. He walked away. Mid-conversation, mid-event, in front of people whose opinions had once defined his decisions, he simply walked away. The room fell into a stunned silence as eyes followed him, confusion spreading like a ripple through the crowd. But Armand didn't stop, not until he reached her. Zoya felt his presence before she looked up, and when she did, the expression in his eyes made her heart tighten in a way she had tried so hard to avoid. There was no hesitation in him anymore, no calculation, just truth. And in that moment, she knew something irreversible was about to happen. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything they had never said, everything they had tried to suppress. Around them, the world watched, judged, waited. But for Armand, none of it mattered anymore, because for the first time in his life, he chose something over everything else.
He chose her. The aftermath was immediate. The event ended in chaos, whispers turning into headlines overnight. The story spread quickly. Rich CEO publicly seen choosing a security guard over his own reputation. Media outlets twisted it, society criticized it, and the corporate world reacted exactly as expected. Investors grew uneasy, the board demanded explanations, reputation took a hit. Armand faced consequences he had always known would come, but had never truly believed he would accept. And yet, through all of it, something inside him felt lighter, because for once, he wasn't pretending. Zoya, however, faced a different kind of storm. The attention she had never wanted suddenly surrounded her. People judged her without knowing her, questioned her intentions, reduced her to labels she had spent her entire life rising above. She became a topic of discussion, a symbol of controversy, a story people felt entitled to interpret, and it broke something inside her. Not because of what people said, but because she saw what it was doing to Armand. She saw the pressure, the consequences, the way his world was slowly turning against him, and no matter how much she tried to deny it, she couldn't escape one painful truth. Loving her was costing him everything. So she made the hardest decision of her life. She left. No dramatic goodbye, no confrontation, just a quiet disappearance from the place where everything had begun. She resigned, packed her life into a few bags, and walked away before her heart could convince her to stay. When Armand found out, it felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. For days he searched, not just physically, but emotionally, trying to understand how something so real could vanish so suddenly. The silence she left behind was louder than any criticism he had faced. But this time, he didn't retreat into his old world. Instead, he changed. Slowly, steadily, he began stepping away from the version of himself that had been built on expectations. He restructured his priorities, distanced himself from the pressures that once controlled him, and started rebuilding his life, not as a CEO trying to maintain an image, but as a man trying to find meaning. Months passed, the noise faded, the headlines disappeared, but one thing never changed. He never stopped looking. And then, one ordinary evening, in a place far from the city's chaos, he found her. There were no cameras, no expectations, no watching eyes, just a quiet moment between two people who had been shaped by everything they had lost and everything they had learned. Zoya had built a new life, simple but peaceful. She had chosen distance to protect him, but she had never truly let go. And Armand, he had finally understood what mattered. The silence between them this time was different. It wasn't filled with fear or hesitation. It was filled with understanding. Because sometimes love doesn't need to fight the world. Sometimes it simply needs the courage to exist despite it. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who believes in love beyond boundaries. And before the ending, here's a special request. Comment below where you're watching from and whether you believe love should follow rules or break them. In the end, their story wasn't about rebellion or defiance. It was about truth, about choosing connection over status, humanity over image, and love over fear. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made it powerful enough to survive in a world that tried so hard to tear it apart.